Hello everybody, my name is Sylvain Rochon, and as you know, I'm writing a second book called also Engineering Paradise, just like my first one, with a different subtitle to be determined. Last week, I posted a video that was talking about the role of corporations, the role of essentially privately held companies and individuals working alongside the government, how they would work with each other. You have the government that is a regulatory body that ensures things and guides things, makes sure things are done equally so everybody has their basic needs met, unbiased. And then you have the privately held corporations and companies and partnerships and consultants and everybody else that are trying to compete in the open market, offer and demand, competition, motivation, everything's great and passionate and exciting, going about their way. Now but the companies are biased, right, by nature, highly efficient and biased, and the government is not so efficient. It could be highly skilled the way I describe it, but not as efficient because there's a lack of inner motivation, inner passion, but biased because that's their inner job, right? Now, this video is about taxation, strangely enough. Like, I want to talk about taxes, and I don't like to talk about taxes, but again, we're in the governance section of the book still, and I did want to take note of the opportunity governments have to, and again, in our ideal future, we are talking about where things can be pretty cool. Governments have the opportunity to guide, because again, their objective is to, for the common good, make sure everybody gets what they need, and so on and so forth. So they need to regulate, and sometimes they need to guide because each nation is operating in a global marketplace. There's other companies that are doing different things. Cost of things are not necessarily equal from nation to nation, country to country. And so there's a need to guide things from a higher level, because companies tend to they're biased. They think for themselves. And that can be good for that particular entity, but it may be bad for the nation. Right? So the government needs to have a guiding hand. Now, how do you do that without actively pushing people around? Well, there are some models out there that I know of that work really well. And my favorite one is using, since corporations and companies in my future ideal world, as well as individuals, would be taxed, like income tax, right? Based on income level and so on. Again, this is all the economy section. I want to go deep in there. So companies, since they need to compete and run forward and do things based on profitability, they would be taxed just like they are now in the West. You get taxed on your profit margin, right? So the bigger the profit margin, the better. That's great. But if you are offered by the government, my favorite, the tax credit, okay, then you take your decisions a little bit differently. I'm going to give you an example from my own personal experience. My businesses were in digital media, building websites and web games and smartphone games. And in my province of Ontario, Canada, there was this nifty Ontario tax credits that was, since we were as a service company, we were able to get, on a couple of projects, 35% tax credit. And there were conditions set by the Ontario government entity for that, right? You just don't get it because, oh, it's the industry. Although that could be the condition, and it needs to be that industry, for example. But that was one of the conditions. One was, needs to be in digital media. Why? Because the Ontario government wanted to increase the amount of jobs in business in that particular space as part of their strategy, okay? But you can't force companies, but if you give them tax credit, and 35% tax credit is indeed significant on all expenses, including part of the marketing. That was the deal. Well, we stayed in Ontario. I mean, there was something equivalent in the province of Quebec, not very far. Some would say probably better structured. But it was a high motivation for us to remain in those countries. And the other conditions was, well, if you want to have the tax credits, like most of your work for that particular project has to be done inside that province. It's conditional. Because again, the purpose of the guiding force, which was the Ontario government at that time, and this program is still there, by the way, as of this moment, is to increase jobs also in that space and capacity building in that space and bring companies over from elsewhere in that space specifically. You wanted to, there was a strategy, there was a plan. So they didn't force companies to go, they just set the stage. Well, if you stay here, do this here and hire our people, you're gonna get 35% tax credits. Now this means less revenue from these, in this case, digital media companies off the projects that did here. Yes, but what was really neat is that because of the influx, because of that high incentive and the job creation and all that stuff, the government actually, there was a lot of more businesses that established themselves in Ottawa, in Toronto, in Guelph, and in other smaller towns. And innovators like smaller companies that just wanted to get started actually did start. So new job creators, right? In the province, in that space. And those companies that made money paid taxes. But they didn't all, they had other expenses that were unrelated to the product. So bottom line is that they actually, from my understanding of reports of the program, they made more money in tax as a result of the incentive than they had to give out. And in part, I have to admit, in part is because a lot of people chose not to file sometimes, so to get the tax credits, which was a little bit complicated. But in essence, it did the job. It guided an industry according to a plan by just inviting creative people to enter the market here. Now, what I could have done as the CEOs and the companies and director is, and I had the opportunity, and I did it sometimes for certain smaller projects where I didn't want to do the paperwork for the tax credits. I didn't want to deal with it, is I outsourced to Eastern Europe, because that's the trade-off. In Eastern Europe or even Malaysia, another location where I had teams of developers and artists on hand, yeah, I could save 30 to 50% off labor by outsourcing it to those firms and individuals overseas. But I would not be able to, I was not able to, I could not get access to that tax credit if I did that. So it was actually better financially for the company to hire people inside my province and as well as to stay there. So it's all about guidance from the government standpoint. You don't meddle with it. It's just, here's the plan and here's what we want to encourage. And then it let the free market roll. And so it was advantageous for us to stay here. It was simpler. And we didn't outsource a lot of the bigger projects. And it worked out really well because, like, as a company, you want to grow. So you want to have that profit margin because, you know, we were a private company. So we really cared about what we were doing. And we were able to get ahead by doing that sort of thing. So that's a great example of how government can work with private sector in a very healthy way. One is guiding, and the other one is just going according to their passion, just human nature. Let innovators roll, and the market sorts itself out very easily. So anyhow, that's a really great. It's a great way to go. Other programs can work as far as tax credits are concerned, or not tax credits, but taxation, just to guide individuals. There's different programs. I think that one was in British Columbia. There was another one that was highly successful, and it was depending on some companies that would invest into a program that the government of the province ran. And it invested in a certain amount of companies, of startup companies. And if the investors invested, the government, the provincial government, would also invest in kind. There was some form of validation of which companies were part of the list, a little bit like a mutual fund would manage something, right? Not a mutual fund, a venture capital fund. They're looking for they're making a list of different companies they want to invest in, and that's the list of potential. And then you have investors investing in it. And if they did invest, the British Columbia, the province, or from taxes, would invest in that in those companies in a 50-50 kind of way. And then these startups would grow, and these would grow new employees, capacity, anything you want, like from that. And then by doing this, taxes actually refund, if you will, the money that was invested by the province. And from and this was maybe 3 years ago, so I'm not sure if it still exists, but it's an example of a different form factor of the same thing. Now, if in that particular case, if my memory serves, for each dollar the province invested in companies over the duration of the program, which ran at least 5 years, they got $7 back from taxes and like in general, just lots of stuff coming back. So it was a highly successful program. And again, this guides things in a certain way. If companies want to be part of that list, you have to follow the conditions. You don't have to, but if you want, and you have to satisfy the conditions, then you get an easier time getting it funded and investing. The investors have an easier time because they don't have to invest the full amount, so less risky for them. The government guides by putting some money where they want growth to happen, right? In the new companies, and then the recuperate. So smart investments, smart returns that drive what they wanted to do at that time. And I believe the ideology behind that particular program was to increase innovation in technology in general. So startups specifically at a certain stage. I think it wasn't like early, but a little bit like after they got started, something like that. But there's a bunch of programs out there, and we can certainly let the experts figure that out. If we have the smartest ones, and their teams will be able to figure it out. But very important is the division of labor between government and the private sector. And we have plenty of history documented and examples to make it a really good go. And both private sectors and the public sector can do really well. And with the balance between biases and unbiased, and the population gets their needs met, and they have all sorts of things they can create. So that makes an exciting future. All right, that's going to be it for now. Have a good one.